Mays, host of the Athletic Football Show, joining us right now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. And a busier trade day than I was expecting yesterday, Robert. I think the Seahawks ended up making a move. I don't know that one person was criticizing this. It was like the fun move of the day. Your first reaction to Rashid Shaheed being acquired by Seattle?
Fireworks, baby. Just in terms of like the sitting down experience of watching a unit, one of the more surprising in the entire NFL. And part of that is their ability and proficiency at pushing the ball down the field. And the fact that they've been able to do it at such a ridiculous clip with, JSN and some Torrey Horton slipped in there as really your vertical downfield threats. I just think that this allows you to kind of put in what would be like a fully realized version of Torrey Horton 2 years from now. You're kind of shortcutting it. And I think that makes sense when you're a team that is probably looking around the NFC and the NFL as a whole and thinking, why can't we do this? Like with one subtle thing, why can't we be right in the conversation? And so from a skill set standpoint, the price they paid and just what it feels like potentially for their offense, I loved it for Seattle.
When you look at the wide receiver group here in Seattle now with Horton and Shaheed, obviously JSN, you got Cooper Kupp. Where do you think they rank in the NFC? Who would you compare them to?
It's a great question. You know what it reminds me of a little bit? I think it's probably not quite to this extent because these two guys are just, better overall players. But what the Rams have with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, where for Seattle, I think it's even a bigger consideration that it's only two because they play with three wide receivers in the field so rarely. 11 personnel at 30% of the time, you really only need two receivers to kind of see through the vision that you want to. And I think that skill set wise, Shaheed and JSN really do complement one another because in this version of the offense we've seen so far, JSN really is their most important and most dynamic vertical threat. He can do that, but he's such a dynamic, dangerous player in the intermediate area of the field. And now it allows you to put him on more of those routes because you have Shaheed in the building. And so on a bunch of different levels, I think it falls into place really well for them.
Seattle's got the best passing offense by DVOA, but in terms of eye test and your experience watching them, where would you rank their passing offense?
I think that they're a group that has really benefited from their ability to dictate how games are going to opposing defenses. And that's not a criticism. That's really speaks to the job that Clint Kubiak has done so far this year. But if you look at just the scenarios in which they've thrown the ball, they do a great job of getting teams into base defense by putting heavier bodies on the field. They use a ton of play action. I think just based on the way they're built, even, some concerns still like interior of the offensive line, lack of overall receiving talent. When you put them in like true drop back scenarios, it's 3rd and 7, we got to have it. I think that's where you might see a little bit of the deficiencies in some of the areas where they still need to grow a little bit. And I think that's why adding a guy like Shaheed is so important because now having one more viable receiving threat on the field when you're in those scenarios, I think allows them to maybe improve there in ways they're going to need to if they're going to do some damage deeper into the season.
Last week, Stacy and I were having conversations surrounding the Seahawks, and it was like, man, when are they going to start getting more love nationally? And I think we settled on, okay, well, they have to have a good showing on Sunday Night Football. Obviously, they do that 38-14, but it was against a banged-up Commanders, yet they're still getting a lot of that love. What did you see during that game that you think kind of influenced the national media to pay attention?
I think anytime you're on that sort of stage, it certainly is helpful, and so everybody's watching that game. I think you get a sense of what this team feels like. And when you are able to just steamroll an opponent like that, even one that's banged up, that matters in the NFL. And I think that's what's been so impressive. I think there are a lot of similarities between what's happening with the Colts and what's happening with the Seahawks. And one of the things that really has jumped out to me about both of those teams is these aren't like squeaker wins for the most part. They are really jumping on these teams. And even when maybe the final score is a little bit closer than the game flow might indicate, like the Jacksonville game is a good example of this to me, they feel dominant over the course of that game. And so for that to be on full display, like that level of we're going to control this thing from the opening whistle to the final whistle, I think it's hard for that not to open people's eyes that maybe hadn't been watching this team very closely so far this year.
I wanted to get back to your point about them forcing base defense on the field, getting a lot of stacked boxes with heavy personnel usage. And that's something we've been talking about a bit here. We've talked with a couple analysts who have said something along the lines of, well, eventually defenses are going to force them to run and kind of call their bluff. And when I've asked Bump about it, he goes, well, I mean, how do you not match personnel? Like, great, fantastic, then do that. So I'm wondering, Robert, about kind of where you see this potentially going. Having Shaheed is massive, right? But kind of down the road, do you see defenses adjusting, or is there just a certain level of respect you have to pay to those matchups no matter what?
It's a great question. I think it depends on the defense, and I think a lot of teams in the NFL, they kind of have those automatic levers. Like if you have a fullback on the field and you're going to play in all these condensed formations, we're going to put base defense on the field. It's just like it incites an immediate reaction and response. And so I'll be curious to see if teams stop doing that and start daring them to run the ball, or when they play against teams that maybe are a little bit better equipped to not play with base defense at all. That's to me what's so remarkable about Seattle's defense. And when you watch that Sunday night game back over again, you sense it on both sides of the ball. Seattle's offense does an incredible job of dictating terms to opposing defenses. We're going to do X, that means you're going to do Y. And in that sort of relationship, we always have the upper hand. Seattle's defense responds to nothing. They're in nickel every single play. They're in a lot of those too high looks on the majority of snaps. And so there's no way that you can make them do what you want to do. And so I'm curious if they run into one of those sorts of teams that maybe is a little bit more comfortable playing with lighter bodies on the field to defend the run, what does that end up looking like? But there just aren't that many defenses in the NFL equipped to play that way.
We spent a lot of time talking about this offense, and rightfully so. They're doing great things this year. But this defense, like you mentioned, has been playing some good football, and that's without Julian Love being out there. Ty Okada subbing in for him. You got Witherspoon back this week. Nick Mawari missed a few games. What makes this defense so special, and what do you think the potential is?
I mean, I think they have a chance over the course of the season to be the best defense in the league. I thought that coming into the year, and there's nothing I've seen so far, especially considering they've been banged up, that has pushed me off that. And it sounds simple, but it's a combination of being really well coached and having good players. Stop me if you've heard that before as like a consistent formula to being good. That's what they have. And you look at that defense, and right now, let's throw Julian Love back in the starting lineup. And let's just say, for argument's sake here, Ernest Jones is healthy, even though I know he's not. Who's the worst player on the Seahawks starting 11 on defense?
Be a backup in one of their...
If Reek starts?
No.
Who else? Who?
Like Tyrese Knight or one of their...
They don't start Drake Thomas probably.
Okay,
it's probably Drake Thomas at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's really the only area where it's like, oh, maybe we could be a little bit better there.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I mean, you have guys that are capable in every single spot. Even coming into the season, if maybe you had some concerns, what is Josh Jobe going to be as a full-time guy? He's been excellent this year in the role that they have him playing. And so personnel-wise, there are very few obvious holes. They have depth in areas that teams just don't have. Like the fact that you can just drop Derek Hall back into the lineup on Sunday. And it's like, oh, yeah, I forgot Derek Hall plays for this team. And then you see what he does every single time he's on the field. The flexibility they have in the secondary when they get healthy. There's just a level of depth, malleability, and talent across the entire defense that very few teams have. And you combine that with a defensive coach and defensive play caller that might be the best in the NFL. Like, you watched how well coached they are and just the communication on the back end, their ability to just understand how routes are distributing and reacting to it that way. They just so rarely feel out of sorts. And when you combine that with the talent level that they have, you just have a group that is really, really hard to play against.
Seahawks taking on the Rams in 2 weeks, November 16th. I'm having a hard time. We were debating earlier in the show and have been talking about it really every single year, but certainly this season with both being such explosive passing offenses, kind of who's got the edge. Who would you give it to right now, Robert?
I think mostly I would give it to the Rams just because I have more equity and trust over time in what that offense is. We talk about in those defined drop back situations, what are the Seahawks going to be able to do in the most important stretches of the season? I've seen Matthew Stafford do that. And so I think in those moments, I kind of default to the team I've seen do it in the playoffs deeper into the season, but I don't think that means the Seahawks can't. I'll say right now, that game, we were talking about it yesterday when we were planning out our podcast of the week. That's the game I'm probably most looking forward to this season, is the first matchup between those two teams. And I think it's because of the quality of those teams. I think it's because of how competitive the NFC West is. And I just love watching Mike McDonald and Sean McVay play against each other. I think for a long time now, when they played against each other a few years ago, I think it was 2023, when Mike was the defense coordinator in Baltimore. I think that game was kind of a microcosm for where offensive and defensive football in the NFL were. Like, these guys are always on the cutting edge, the two of them on either side of the ball. And so now the fact that we get to see them go up against each other when the opposing unit, like the Rams defense and the Seahawks offense, have now risen to a level where that side of the ball becomes compelling. Like, as a football nerd, there is no better matchup right now in the NFL than those two teams playing against each other.
Yeah, I agree. Trying to encourage people not to look past the Cardinals. Obviously, that is named Jacoby Brissett as their starter over there. What type of problems do you see the Cardinals presenting for the Seahawks?
I think they've done a really good job of tapping into exactly who they want to be on offense with Jacoby Brissett back there. You know, this is a team, if you look at where Drew Petzing, their offensive coordinator, comes from, he wants to line up under center, they want to use play action, and they want to throw those in breakers to Marv and Trey McBride and all those guys. And that's just not a style of football that Kyler's ever really been comfortable playing. And so it's kind of crazy when you sub in a guy that is a journeyman backup that you got for a few million bucks this offseason, and you pretty clearly are more able to run the offense that you want to run. And so I think the whole thing with them just feels a little bit more cohesive on that side of the ball with Jacoby in there, and that's why they're sticking with him. And on defense, this defense has been pretty good all year. You know, they were banged up in the secondary for stretches of the early part of the season, but now you get those guys back where, you know, Will Johnson's playing well. You get Max Melton back. Garrett Williams is back in the lineup now at nickel. And now their defensive front is really starting to come along. You know, Walter Nolan is a fantastically talented player. And them not having him for the first half of the year because that calf injury he had in training camp, you know, you saw what he's capable of doing now that he's dropped back into the lineup. So it's him, Josh Sweat. I think that defense is going to be a unit that maybe surprises some people in the back half of the year.
5 NFC teams have 6 wins, 6-3 for San Francisco, 6-2 for the other 4. And I feel like this is a bit of a cop-out because you can really make a case for any one of these teams in theory, right? Like, oh, well, maybe a really healthy San Francisco team, or like we've seen this version of the Eagles before. But if you had to say right now which team you're betting on, which team you're kind of looking at as like, I mean, they're my number one until they aren't in the NFC, who would it be?
It's a great question. I think it's probably between the Seahawks and the Rams still. I think those are probably the teams that I would land on. You know, the Eagles and the Rams. I think that, you know, the Eagles, they're inconsistent. There's no doubt about that. There are stretches where their offense is just maddening to watch. But at the same time, we've seen them do this before, where they can be this uneven group throughout the regular season, and then they can really tap into something. And if you look at some of the ideas they've trotted out on offense over the last couple of weeks, they're clearly trying to find stuff that works for them, and I think they're getting closer and closer to that. And the defense, you know, we'll see what happens with Jalen Phillips and Michael Carter in there now. You know, you really felt a lack of edge depth for that team. It's the reason they had to go out and get Darius Smith and convince Brandon Graham to come out of retirement. Jalen Phillips, I think, really does solve a need for them. And if they can get better cornerback play by moving Cooper DeJean outside with Michael Carter, you kind of solve the issues on their defense. And so that team, I think, just earns the benefit of the doubt at this point. And I just think that the Rams, top to bottom right now, are a really, really good football team. Their defense playing as well as it is, combined with the superpowers we know they have on offense, those are probably the ones I'd keep in the top tier. The Green Bay just continues to be frustrating to me. Like, I just don't know what to make of them. Their best is as good as anybody, but there just is an inconsistency there that worries me. And then I think the Seahawks are right there, like at the top of that second tier, just below a team like the Rams and the Eagles. And so I think there are a lot of really, really good teams on that side of the bracket right now.
We had Isaiah Stanback on our show last week, and I asked him, okay, who's a team that, you know, we should probably start watching that no one's talking about? And he said the Panthers. Lo and behold, they go out and they win a ball game. What's going on we call them the East Coast Seahawks with all the connections they have over there. What's going on with the Panthers?
They're a fun team to watch right now, and I've been so impressed with what their run game has looked like over the course of the year. You know, obviously Rico Dowdle is playing really good football, and he's kind of wrestled away that backfield. But the offensive line and what they're getting out of that group, even though they've been hurt for a good chunk of the year, it's just really, really impressive. And so the design of that run game and their ability to kind of get the most out of all the component parts I think has really gone a long way. And, the defense is just, if you look at where they were last year and where they are now, I think you could make a serious argument that it's the most improved unit in the NFL. And it's kind of exactly what they wanted it to be. That team last year on defense was historically bad, especially against the run. And you get Derek Brown back this year, you get J.C. Horn back healthy, and then they spent a ton of money in free agency to just kind of get to a level where it's like, okay, we're like a competent NFL defense. And that's exactly what they are. And so I think a lot of what they wanted to be in the offseason has kind of fallen into place. The problem is I'm not sure that's the case for Bryce Young. I think if I was excited about the Panthers coming into the year. I thought they would be a sneaky, potential wild card contender. I thought they'd be competent. I thought Bryce Young continuing his level of play from the second half of last season would be a part of that. And unfortunately, he has struggled more than I expected him to. Thankfully for the Panthers, a lot of the other elements of who they are have kind of been able to make up for that.
The Athletic Football Show, hosted by Robert Mays. It's always really weird when we have hosts of shows we regularly listen to on. I feel like I'm talking to my podcast. I just listened to your guys' trade episode. Rate, review, subscribe. Excellent work from him. An excellent interview as always. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert.